Hello, everyone. So excited to be here. My name is Travis Loudermilk. I'm a UX researcher for the developer division at Microsoft. We call ourselves DevDiv for short, and in DevDiv, we have about 1,800 people responsible for making tools and services for developers. Our most notable products are under the Visual Studio family. Now, I'm not an official spokesperson for Microsoft, but what I can tell you is that our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And when I think about that mission, I'm often reminded of what our CEO, Satya Nadella, wrote about in his book, Hit Refresh. He says he puts empathy at the center of everything he pursues. That's sort of the operating equation at Microsoft. We take the empathy that we generate from connecting with our customers and combine that empathy with the growth mindset to come up with solutions that will ultimately delight and inspire our customers. And I believe that's what user experience research is all about. It's to encourage continuous learning and customer connection within our organizations. So our UX research team, we needed to stretch the definitions of what it meant to be a UX researcher. What does that look like in practice? Well, of course, the traditional definition of a UX researcher is someone who can run usability studies, conduct customer interviews, launch surveys, site visits, focus groups. And of course, the goal of these efforts is to bring the customer a little closer to the product team, to get product teams to look beyond their computer screens and see the customer and truly empathize with their problems. But I have to tell you something, the more I've done this job over the years, the more I'm convinced that there's an even bigger opportunity for us as UX researchers to reduce the friction between the product teams themselves. I mean, think about it. Our UX community is literally filled with experts in human behavior. But how often do we take advantage of that expertise and apply it to helping our own product team solve their challenges? I'm absolutely convinced that our community has the power, the knowledge, and the experience to close the distance between our product teams. Over the past several years, our team has been developing a program we call Customer-Driven Engineering, or CDE for short. CDE is a program where we as UX researchers work to empower our product teams with the tools and skills that they need to better connect and learn from the customers they serve. Essentially, we're giving all of our expertise away, showing program managers, designers, content writers, data scientists, and engineers our UX research tips and tricks so that they can join us and participate in a journey of co-discovery. And I do mean all of it. We're having them conduct formative research all the way down to evaluative research.
You what?
All right. Now, I know for some of you on the call, this may seem controversial, but hold with me here for a second and let me show you some numbers. When we started our journey in DevDiv to become more customer-driven, roughly about 7 years ago, our goal was to triple the number of engaged developers that were using our products and services. And at that time, we had about 1.5 million developers. In the time since, we've seen the number of our customers rise to over 18 million. We've also seen the number of direct customer observations. This is where our product teams directly participate in usability tests, focus groups, concept value tests, and site visits. We've seen those types of observations go up from virtually 0 to nearly 8,000 observations per year. And when we looked at the number of direct customer interviews, these are structured interviews where our product teams are talking directly to customers. Again, we saw these numbers grow from pretty much 0 to 12,000 interviews per year. So essentially, we have more people than ever in our organization participating in customer learning, more than ever before. Okay, so how are we doing this? Well, at its heart, CDE addresses customer connection from two major pillars: our day-to-day process, the tools we use to bring the customers into the center of our product planning and development, and our culture. You see, in DevDiv, we treat culture like a product. We employ the same research methods that we're using to develop our products to help better understand each other and our needs so that we can continue to develop our culture. And a quick plug here, both of these pillars are covered in books that are available through O'Reilly. The Customer-Driven Playbook, which I co-authored with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Jessica Rich, covers our entire software making process that we use with our product teams every day. The Customer-Driven Culture, which I co-authored with my mentor, Dr. Monty Hammontree, explores how to build an entire culture of customer obsession within your organization. So we're going to cover both of these, but let's start with our process. We have 18 researchers on our team. Now, each one of those researchers is assigned to a product area, and they help them with the day-to-day research that needs to be done. And additionally, we have researchers assigned to conduct wide horizontal research for the entire organization. And all of our researchers are responsible for coaching our program managers, engineers, designers, content writers. We're helping them by showing them how to write hypotheses, formulate discussion guides to prepare for interviews, and help them analyze data and make sense of what they're learning. Every new program manager in DevDiv, whether you've been at Microsoft for 15 years or 15 days, they'll go through a 3.5-day customer-driven workshop where we walk them through our entire process of formulating assumptions into hypotheses, formulating those hypotheses into a discussion guide, and then we actually schedule interviews with real customers so that they can test their hypotheses on those customers. And we also introduce activities like How Might We, the impact effort matrix, storyboarding, and concept value testing to help them explore product iteration. We'll also have them work with a lean business model canvas so that they can explore the business implications of their product ideas. The backbone of our process is a framework we developed to help teams craft hypotheses. We call it the Hypothesis Progression Framework, or HPF for short. And at its highest level, it organizes our efforts into 5 stages, helping our teams navigate between customer, product, and business development. Each stage of the HPF seeks to address a fundamental question, and we include a series of tools within each stage to help our teams do that. For example, at the customer stage, we're trying to learn a lot of things about our customers, but fundamentally, we're trying to ensure that these customers exist. In DevDiv, we're not going to rely on fictitious personas that have been crafted to illustrate the ideal customer. Instead, we're going to rely on real customer profiles that have been crafted from talking to real customers. At the next stage, we begin to identify what problems our customers have. How painful are these problems? And do these problems present a unique opportunity for our business? And once we understand our target customers and deeply empathize and understand with the problems they're having, we then have to transition that learning into product development. And as you well know, there's a lot of ways we can solve a single customer problem. So the question becomes not only how do we solve the customer's problem, but how do we do it in a way that creates value for them? Throughout this whole process, we're constantly going back to the customer, checking in and testing our assumptions to make sure we're still on the right track. As our minimum viable product, or MVP, becomes clearer, we need to continually check in with customers to ensure that what we're building allows the customer to successfully solve the problem and that they're continually satisfied with it. So in the feature stage, we're conducting quick pulse studies or weekly usability studies, and our teams are participating in those to help them gain confidence on what they're building and making sure that they're building it the right way. And finally, at the business stage, we want to ensure that we're connecting the work we're doing to the business goals that we have for our division. So at this stage, our product teams can run experiments to test everything from branding, messaging, pricing, and distribution. We call this the hypothesis progression framework because each stage has its own fundamental hypothesis template that our teams use to organize their efforts. Each template has a series of hypothesis parameters like motivation or job to be done, so our teams can track what makes each of their hypotheses unique. And we're an engineering organization, so it's not uncommon to see our teams create hypotheses backlogs, just like the backlogs they create for their product work, so that they can track the progress of their learning as they move along. Now, while I explained each stage from left to right, I should note that this isn't really how our teams use the HPF. Product development is messy, so our teams often navigate back and forth through these stages, increasing their confidence within each stage. But the pattern of every stage is still the same. They formulate their assumptions into hypotheses, they run small batch experiments to increase their rate of learning, and they continually step back and make sense of the data they've collected so far. So usually right about now is when folks start asking us, okay, how did you convince an organization of over 1,800 people to change the way they make products? How did you get them to take on new responsibilities like crafting hypotheses or talking to customers or analyzing customer data? And when we reflected on our journey, what we learned was that essentially we hacked our culture. Remember when I told you that in DevDiv, we look at culture as a product? Well, I really do mean that. And when you evaluate your culture through that lens, you identify that there's all these cultural levers that you can pull to affect change in a positive way. We call them culture hacks, and sometimes it can be a simple hack like changing the way we talk or look at things. Or it can be more dramatic, like piloting a new cultural initiative to drive more diversity and inclusion into the work we're doing for our customers and each other. So with the time remaining, I want to briefly cover each one of these hacks. To change the culture, you got to have the right language. One of the first things we landed on was that if we wanted a culture of continuous learning and collaboration, we had to embrace a language of learning. With tools like the HPF, we were able to encourage folks to reframe their beliefs about the customers into assumptions, or to refer to their product ideas as hypotheses to be tested. This language of learning had a dramatic effect on our culture because as you change the language, it starts to change the way people think about product development, and that ultimately changes their actions and behaviors. And finally, it'll eventually change the entire value system of the organization. In our case, it moved us from an organization that was obsessed with shipping things to an organization that was valued learning first. To accelerate that level of learning, you have to have folks that are willing to share knowledge freely, and that includes our discipline. I'd like to challenge everyone on the call today to reflect on what your job would look like if your sole focus was to empower everyone around you to learn. I want to pause here for a second because this is important. I want you to think about my favorite sport, baseball. Major League Baseball here in America. It heavily invests in youth sports, specifically Little League. Now, do professional baseball players feel threatened by all these young people participating in baseball, learning how to play and honing their expertise? Well, no, of course not. Instead, it's actually the opposite. Many athletes often lean in and donate their own time and resources because they understand that it's important for as many people as possible to be exposed to the sport of baseball. It's important because it keeps the sport alive, fresh, and vibrant. You know, when a young person swings a bat at the plate and connects with the ball, sending it over the third baseman, there's two things that happen. They get the thrill of getting on base, and that feels pretty great. But second, they begin to have an immense respect for the professional athlete who can hit a ball 500 feet over the center field fence. The same is true for our discipline. In our organization, the more our research team was giving away their expertise, the more respect and influence we gained in the process. So as researchers, we should be reflecting on our own attitudes and behaviors, particularly as we work with non-researchers. There's a fantastic book, The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. He talks about the importance of belonging cues. Essentially, what neuroscience and social science research tells us is that our brains have evolved into assimilation machines. We're basically scanning for cues that help us define what it means to belong to a group or tribe. And the more in sync we are with the group, essentially the more social benefits we gain. Think about it. We don't have printed instructions in front of elevators to describe in great detail how we should operate them. You'd never dream of laying down in the middle of a crowded elevator. We intuitively know that that's not acceptable behavior. That's our brain picking up on belonging cues. Now, of course, that's an egregious example, but let's imagine more nuanced belonging cues that our brains pick up on, particularly as we researchers work with non-research. You know, nitpicking on a non-researcher's hypothesis or a public critique of their interviewing techniques, you know, the first time that they're trying to talk with customers. Of course, we might argue that it's our moral obligation to protect the quality of research, but behaving in that way does have unintended consequences. It sends a strong belonging cue to non-researchers that says, you know, this connecting with customers stuff, it's scary. And if you're not careful, you're going to get into trouble. You know, why don't you let us experts handle this? And we need to move away from that mindset as researchers and instead be the champions of continuous learning, collaboration, growth mindset, and especially psychological safety. We should also be the champions of our product teams that we support, not be seen as the user experience auditor. We want to be in the business of helping our product teams gain visibility within our organizations. So we need to be on the lookout for opportunities to highlight program managers, engineers, designers, or any product team member who's doing outstanding work, particularly if it's by connecting with customers. Essentially, we have an incredible opportunity in our unique role as researchers to help our leadership teams identify the leaders of tomorrow. And guess what? If you're a research team that's struggling to gain influence within your organization, watch how fast you gain influence when you start helping others get promoted. In the book Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard, authors Chip and Dan Heath talk about focusing on bright spots. And turns out there's a lot to learn from things that are going right. Yet I think as researchers, we often focus on giving all of our investigative efforts towards things that are going wrong. So try this. When you see good customer-driven behaviors to be celebrated, take the time to get the details of how it happened, learn about the impact it had on the customer, and the lessons that other product teams can learn from that success. You can even prepare a set of slides so that your leaders have these stories at the ready should they be in a venue where they need to share great examples of customer-driven work. The way we gain our product team's trust is by moving away from dogmatic ideals of how UX should be done. I've studied the behavior of change agents for over a decade, and there's one thing that stands out above all else. These great change agents who have inspired change within their organizations, communities, and industries, they're passionately pragmatic. They meet people where they are, understand their needs first, and then they help solve their problems in a way that aligns with the change that they're seeking to make. As an example, when we introduced the HPF to our product teams, we didn't mandate that everyone had to use it. Instead, we changed the working language to encourage the writing of hypotheses first. We had a one-size-fits-one strategy, giving teams the flexibility to choose however they wanted to meet that goal of writing good hypotheses. And it turned out that many of them chose the HPF because it was a tool that had been specifically designed for them. Culture change by mandate simply doesn't work because it leaves people disempowered and feeling like they're being told to change rather than choosing to change. And that's even when they actually agree with the change you're proposing. The key is finding that balance. Push too hard for change in your organization and you'll be met with strong resistance. Don't push hard enough and you'll wait forever for meaningful change to happen. So in DevDiv, we talk a lot about making things one direction, not one way. And we look for opportunities where we can give teams ownership and flexibility of how they want to be customer driven. Finally, our last culture hack is making data relatable. To create a culture that's truly customer driven, we found that you must speak to both the head and the heart. Data alone can persuade, but it won't inspire others to act. I've yet to meet a product team that is inspired to get out of bed every morning to bump up an NPS score. So as more and more product teams were talking with customers, we learned that we needed to help them share data in a way that didn't lose the empathy that they were gaining, helping them take the data out of their spreadsheets and craft stories that inspired others into action. The goal of any customer-driven effort is to move people toward inspired action, moving teams from being exposed, aware, or even understanding the details of a customer's problem. We want to engender empathy by connecting our teams with customers, but even more, by giving our teams tools to do this for themselves, not asking them to wait until we finish a report for them with all the insights, but letting them join in and participate in a journey of co-discovery. What you will find is that you end up creating customer advocates who are inspired to act. We discovered a trove of insights from author and illustrator Dan Rome. The focus of his series of books like The Back of the Napkin or Blah, 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 What to Do When Words Don't Work is to help organizations better communicate with simple visuals. He refers to it as visual grammar. Basically, we help teams identify the story that they're trying to share, and we give them visual components to make that story more vivid, giving our teams examples of illustrations that will help make the data more relatable and surface the who, the how much, the where, when, how, and why. We also help teams identify the core message or moral of their research, formulating all their data into the big idea and helping them craft creative ways to make those ideas easy to digest, but also powerful and memorable. And as you reflect on these culture hacks, I'd encourage you to think about special moments you can engineer with your partner teams that you work with. Introducing a common language that's learning first and that demonstrates a growth mindset and fosters psychological safety. Building bridges with other disciplines and treating learning like a team sport. Encouraging learning and supporting the courage it takes for non-researchers to try something new. Abandoning those behaviors that position us researchers as the role of auditor, seeking to show the organization how much we know. We should look for moments when we can raise the visibility of non-research partners, particularly when they're exhibiting great customer-driven behaviors. We want to be pragmatic and meet teams where they are instead of getting frustrated because they don't want to be where we are. And finally, I'd encourage us to continue to develop strategies to help product teams share their own customer insights in ways that preserve the customer empathy that they gained along the way and ultimately inspire our entire organizations into action. how I went through all of this at lightning speed. Again, if you want more detail about our process and our culture, be sure to check out our books. You can also find out ways to connect with me at travisloudermilk.com. I'd love to hear from any of you. I'm so grateful to Sonia and the entire Qual 360 team for giving me this opportunity. I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much for your time.